Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike, but that's not why I'm here today. Today, I'm going to try to show you how to use a compact camera to take nighttime photography scenes. Now, these pictures that I'm showing you are not mine, they're from Google Images, but they show you the power of just using the natural light of the object and not a flash. And normally you would think that you would have to use an expensive DSLR like this with a prime lens, and these are awesome for nighttime photography, but you know what? You can even use a simple point and shoot camera if you know what to do. I have three examples here. This is a enthusiast camera. This camera has a lot of manual controls. It's a Nikon P7700. It has a nice fast lens, but its sensor is only about 1/8 of the size of the sensor in this DSLR. Bigger sensors mean better light gathering. This next camera that we're going to use is called a deluxe camera. That's what I would call it. This is a Sony Hx30V. It's mostly known for its super zoom, and it's a 20x zoom, but it also has some manual functions. Its sensor size is the size of the typical compact camera, which is about 1/13 the size of a sensor in a DSLR, but we can still use it. And lastly, we have the Sony W560. This is a common point and shoot camera. Not a lot of manual controls, but there are some hidden that we can use to our advantage to do some nighttime photography. So to learn how to do nighttime photography, you have to learn to swim with an E. This is my poor man's PowerPoint. And what does that stand for? Well, the S stands for steady. You cannot hold the camera. You have to have the camera steady. And the easiest way to do that is with a tripod. There are many different kinds of tripods, from small ones to cheap ones to expensive ones. There's whole videos on tripods. Of course, an expensive tripod is best, but even a cheap tripod like this one that I got as a freebie will work if you need to use it. You can also create your own tripod by placing your camera on a solid object like this box, or perhaps a picnic table or the hood of your car. In fact, this picture was taken by placing the camera on the back of a pew. This is actually a picture of Notre Dame in Montreal. The other thing that you want to do is to use the remote timer on the back of your camera. It's usually located around here, and that allows you to set the camera to go off between 2 or maybe 10 seconds after you press the shutter button. The reason you want to do that is because even pressing that button can have a negative effect on your image. It can shake the image. So if you press and then it takes a few seconds to shoot it, all that shaking is gone and you'll get a much clearer picture. What's the next thing that you need to remember for the swim? Wide. Shoot wide. Why is that? Because here again, let's take this as an example. All compact cameras don't have fixed apertures when they zoom. The amount of light at the far end that the camera can take in is going to be less than at its widest angle. For instance, in this camera, the difference is about 1.8 times more light when it's in its wide angle versus its telephoto angle. So that's almost 2 times as much light. So when you're shooting without a flash at night, keep your lens as wide as possible. What's the next thing you need to know? I is for ISO. ISO is basically how sensitive your sensor is to light, or how much gain is placed on that sensor. Now naturally, the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is, and you would think that that would be the thing that you'd want to do, put your ISO all the way up for nighttime photography, but that's not the case. That's used for other things. You want to keep your ISO around 100 or 200, and the reason that you want to do that is because you have a lot less noise in your picture, because these are typically long exposures. What's M for? M is for manual. And so you're going to want to use as many manual settings as your camera will allow, and that will change from camera to camera, and we'll talk about that. And finally, E is for, there's my fingers here, experiment. And you need to practice this a little bit. Maybe just practice in your backyard or on your front lawn. And I'm going to show you some pictures like that. And also when you're taking pictures, even if you think you have the correct exposure, try taking the exposure up a notch and down a notch. You can always pick the best possibility when you're back at home and looking at those pictures with the big screen of your computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and actually take some pictures using these techniques, and I'll kind of walk you through them. So let me kind of go into the right screen here. All right, this is just down a suburban street, and this is pretty much what it looks like. It's dark. There's a few street lights, maybe a few porch lights lit. You really can't see too much. Now let's say I go out and I just put my camera on automatic and I hold it and I take a shot. I get something that looks like this. And I don't know if you can see this on your screen or not, because this will be compressed with YouTube. The ISO is pushed up to 800 on this camera. It's 1 second exposure. The camera picture itself looks very grainy. It's out of focus. It's blurry because I'm holding it. In fact, if I zoom in, you can really see all that noise and that blurriness. It's just not a desirable shot. Well, what about this shot? This shot was taken at the exact same time, or maybe a minute or two later, but using different settings. Here I'm using the Nikon, the one that's more of an enthusiast camera, and I have the ISO set at 200. The f, or the wideness of the lens, is 2.8, and actually it gets wider than that, but I'm just using 2.8, and I'm actually exposing the film or the sensor for 15 seconds. And this is, it's kind of a cool picture. Now let's say if I even adjust further, this now has an f of 2. The lower the number, the more light you let in, and this is an exposure of 20 seconds. That picture that in the first one that I showed you almost looked like it was pitch black. Now it looks like it's in the afternoon, and that's just adjusting the opening on the lens and increasing the time of exposure. So let's go to our other camera, our kind of deluxe camera. That's the Sony Hx30V. So here again, a perfectly acceptable picture. Now I have not modified these in a photo editor. I could peak them even more. The only thing I did was I did adjust white balance, which I could have done in the camera, but I didn't do it. But didn't fool around with levels or anything. Here we're at an ISO of 200, and at the widest opening of this camera, which is 3.2. So it's not as good as that enthusiast camera. And here we're taking a 15-second exposure. Perfectly acceptable. Now we move up to a 20-second exposure, still the same, the widest, 3.2, f3.2, ISO 200, a little bit brighter, even better, more definition. Again, perfectly acceptable, and I can guarantee that I'd be able to tweak this even more in a photo editor. Well, let's go to our compact camera. And to do that, we have to understand that there's not going to be a lot of settings that we can control as we could in those first two cameras. And typically what you want to do is you want to go into scene mode. Now this is not the exact back of my camera. I just found this someplace. But you see there's a lot of scenes, and the one that we want to use on a Sony is the one that looks sort of like a moon. And what that is called a Twilight Mode, and what it's good for is taking pictures on a tripod without a flash. So that's what we want. We want no flash, and we want to be able to have it use a tripod so it's as steady as possible. Now different cameras may have different menus. Here's just another menu that I found, and on this camera it's called Night Scenery Mode. So you might just have to look around to see what mode is the one that you want. You do not want one that uses a high ISO, and you don't want one that uses a flash. It has to be no flash, low ISO, and it will be different from camera to camera. So I take that same shot, and guess what? Using the set parameters, it looks like just what I was looking at, a dark street with a few lights lit. Well, that might be a little discouraging, but don't fret, because People don't normally shoot dark streets with a few lights. What they want to shoot is a brightly lit building or an active scene someplace with a lot of lights. And by using that Twilight Mode, you can get awesome pictures. So here's just a picture. I went to my local downtown in the little town I live in, and here's a picture of the Apple store. You can see it's awesome using that nighttime mode. Here's a picture of one of our local pizzerias. Again, an awesome shot using that nighttime mode. Now, or Twilight Mode on this camera. Now, don't forget, I was using a tripod and I was using the timer function, which went off after 2 seconds. So the camera wasn't being touched when this exposure was made. Here's just another shot showing you how great that picture can be if you're just using a tripod, the timer mode, and the right mode in your camera. So there you have it, nighttime photography using a point-and-shoot camera. It's absolutely possible. The more sophisticated the camera that you have, the more options you have to take really extraordinary pictures in extraordinarily low light. But even if you don't have a fancy camera, if you have a little light around and you use the self-timer and the right mode and a tripod, you can take great pictures. If you get some time, please give my podcast a listen. It's called Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. Totally free on iTunes and other podcatching sites. And as always, have a great day.